It's like knowing that I have a car in the driveway that can produce 500 horsepower and gets 15 miles per gallon. That's just energy balance. That's what it does with energy. That's similar to calories. But if I don't know what kind of fuel to put in the engine, it doesn't matter at all. In other words, if you put biodiesel in a 500 horsepower drag car, it's not going to go. In fact, it's going to break. We need to look in the same way of saying, what do I know about nutrition? It's not just calories in, calories out. It's what kind of fuel and at what ratio should I be putting it in the tank?
Hello and welcome to the Optimal Agency Podcast. My name is Patrick Cummings, as always joined by John Gilson. Together with you, we are exploring the ideas of agency, diving deep to discover a set of guidelines on how each of us can best operate in the day-to-day to maximize our personal autonomy, professional freedom, and ultimately our positive impact on the world. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. How are you, John?
I'm a kid on a snow day, Pat.
Kid on a snow day, literally and of course emotionally. All right. I'm excited to get into this conversation. We've got a listener question this week. Every other week, we talk through a question sent to us by a listener. And then the following week, we do a longer discussion on how we can own our lives by becoming optimal agents. We will do that next week. Before we get into this question from Brandy, if you would like to get a question into a future episode, we surely would love it. The best way to do so, optimalagency.co/questions. It'll take you just a couple minutes to fill out a quick form, and we'll add it to our queue. The link is in the show notes if you want to get there quickly and easily. That is how Brandy got this question in. Here's what she says. I'm excited about this. This is one of our I think this might be our first health-related question as we've been doing these listener questions. We get a lot of wealth questions. We get a lot of time questions. We don't get a ton of health questions. So again, if you've got some for us, we'd love to hear them. This is from Brandy. What is the optimal way to make your diet calorically consistent day after day with a busy life? I've got 2 kids, a full-time job that requires travel, restaurant meals with business partners, and happy hours for networking required for my job. I meal prep and have stretches of hitting caloric targets, but I'm not seeing the consistency I'm shooting for. Alcohol and sugar are rare in my diet. Would love to know your thoughts on ways to improve consistency. So I think we've got a lot of things for this. So let's dive right in. Where do we want to begin?
Awesome. Well, let's start with, Brandy, what you're doing is aiming to achieve consistency, and now we need to make some assumptions. I'm assuming you're looking for that consistency either to maintain the weight you're at or likely to drop weight. In other words, I'm going to guess you're not in a bulking phase. The next thing that is worth understanding is that you have taken to heart, likely, the energy balance theory of nutrition. That is that your calories out through your basal metabolic rate, through exercise and activity, etc., need to exceed your intake in order for you to lose weight. This is partially correct, but really a oversimplification of nutrition in my mind. And so I want to back up and talk not just to Brandy, but to all of our Optimal Agency listeners about what diet is, in my opinion, what the framework is, why we pay attention to nutrition. So the first is, I believe that nutrition and diet need to be health-focused, not aesthetics-focused. In other words, it's very possible and probable that you have the ability to look the way you want to look without being healthy. In other words, approximately 10% of people who have type 2 diabetes demonstrate no obesity whatsoever. So it's very, very possible for you to not be healthy and be quote unquote pretty, looking the way you want to. So that's one. The second thing, I think diet needs to be sustainable. And this is the core of Brandy's question really is, hey, I'm traveling, I have kids, there's other demands on me through my job and otherwise. How do I make this something that I can stick with and do all of the time? And then the last thing I think a diet needs to be is imperfect. In other words, there are going to be times when you cannot achieve exactly your plan. You can't achieve your calorie target, your macronutrient target. You have to eat some highly processed food. Okay. And we need to allow that to happen. But at the core of it, I need you to know your why. Why am I eating this way? And if you're pursuing agency, my argument is that you should be eating to maximize your health span, the period of life through which you can act on the world with impact. That's the only reason, right? So that might mean pursuing athletic performance. For some of us, that might mean overcoming a disease or dropping body fat, but you need to know your why. So if we zoom out and say, I have a busy life, how do I fit nutrition into it? I would take the opposite tack and say, you have to handle nutrition. How do you organize your life around that core need? Because proper nutrition has to come before a lot of things if you want health span. It actually comes before your job. It becomes before your family obligations. And I realize how crazy that sounds, but it comes from this oxygen mask on before helping others ethos of you need to be healthy. You need to be cognitively with it. What benefits your kids more than you being those things? Well, how about you not being irritable? How about you having the energy to interact with them at 5:30 p.m. after you get home from your job when you'd rather take a nap, right? And so nutrition comes before everything. We tend to view it, especially in the Western world, as convenience. And it's not. It is not about convenience. There are frameworks we can apply to make it more convenient. So how do you do it? How do you get to a place? And what does a proper diet look like? How do you do it? And it requires three things. Knowledge. You need to actually know about nutrition. Calories in, calories out requires almost no knowledge of nutrition. And it's, in my mind, let me give you an analogy. Okay? It's like knowing that I have a car in the driveway that can produce 500 horsepower and gets 15 miles per gallon. Okay, so this is some kind of hot rod, right? But if I that's just energy balance. That's what it does with energy. That's similar to calories. But if I don't know what kind of fuel to put in the engine, it doesn't matter at all. In other words, if you put biodiesel in a 500 horsepower drag car, it's not going to go. In fact, it's going to break. And so we need to look in the same way of saying, what do I know about nutrition? It's not just calories in, calories out. It's what kind of fuel and at what ratio should I be putting it in the tank? Second is preparation. Whether I'm traveling, whether I'm at home, I need to actually have the food on hand. I need to know how to prepare it, how to cook it, and I need to know when to eat it. And then the third is environmental control. You actually need to not take food as it comes, because convenience-based food is restaurant-based food, it's delivery-based food, it's snack-based food. It's almost entirely going to be either ultra-processed, it's going to come out of a kitchen whose primary goal is to get you to come back and pay the bill again. And so they're going to give you high levels of sugar, high levels of salt, high levels of butter, high levels of condiments, a lot of things that aren't great for you. And so if I have those three things, knowledge, preparation, and environmental control, the next question should be obvious. How the hell do I do all of that? How do I make it as simple as humanly possible? And there's a cottage industry of people trying to boil this down to the simplest possible formula that there is. And when they do, they often leave out one of those elements, right? Is it health focused? Does it have macronutrient balance? Does it have the right caloric density? They'll try and key in on one of those as if it's the most important, but they're all important. And so when we formulated Optimal Agency's rules of essentially food, there's two of them, right? There's Health Rule 2 and Health Rule 3. They're eat unprocessed foods, and that includes minimally processed foods, but eat unprocessed foods and cook your own meals, and do not eat sugar or drink alcohol. Okay? This is as simple as we can make it to say the primary thing you need to do is eat the right foods, high quality foods, those with high vitamin and mineral content, those that won't screw with your hormonal balance, with your endocrine system, with your metabolism, right? And those that will give you the best shot of having essentially low level and steady blood sugar levels. And then we say don't eat sugar. That one's fairly obvious. The correlation between the consumption of table sugar, of corn syrup, of high fructose corn syrup, etc., and poor health is monumentally one-to-one. Those charts of diabetes, heart disease, cancer, Alzheimer's, etc., scale immediately, not only with the consumption of sugar, but with the level of consumption of sugar. And so in my mind, those two rules, eat unprocessed foods and cook your own meals, Okay, cook your own meals gives you environmental control. Eat unprocessed food gives you a health focus. And do not eat sugar or drink alcohol, similarly, is a health focus maximizing health span. Your hierarchy of concern is not calories first. So, Brandy, you may have omitted quite a bit of detail in your question, and you may be at the bottom of this hierarchy already focusing on calories. But for everybody else, a calorie is not a calorie is not a calorie. In other words, when you ingest sugar, what happens to your body or carbohydrate is very different than what happens when you ingest protein, is very different than when you ingest fat. They have literal hormonal effects and almost immediate effects in your body that regulate how you partition calories to fat storage versus immediate use, how you activate, mobilize, and stored fat, how you actually generate energy in the body depending on what level of activity you're pursuing, whether it's aerobic activity, whether it's anaerobic activity, whether it's sedentary or highly active. Okay, so the hierarchy at the top, minimally processed, unprocessed food. As I said, it's going to give you the vitamins, it's going to give you the minerals, and it's not going to screw with those partitioning systems. In other words, you're going to operate as the machine should. You're putting the right fuel in the tank. Then, and only then, and you can stop there, by the way, you'll be healthy. Okay. But then we can go down to your macronutrient balance, your ratio between protein, carbohydrate, and fat. In almost every sense where I've had those calculated by nutritional experts, the ratios are almost always the exact same. It's 30% protein, 40% carbohydrate, 30% fat. Okay? Now, that can be translated directly to calories of each of those. But you can imagine how limiting it would be if I just said you're on a 2,200 calorie diet. You could get that entirely from walnuts. And what would happen to your health and your body would be poor, right? You could get that entirely from spinach. Well, good luck. You probably actually literally physically couldn't. But what would happen to you would not be ideal because you wouldn't be essentially feeding the energy systems. So if I was traveling, if I had kids, if I was worried about this hierarchy, the first thing I would do is not track my calories or worry about caloric consistency. I'd worry about eating unprocessed food, straight up. So when I travel, the way that you do that is pretty simple. If it's an outbound day, in other words, you're leaving home, pack some food, right? You can at least control your next probably 2 to 3 meals. That way, they don't have to be perfect, but they do have to be unprocessed. Right? This can be as simple as I threw a banana and a cooked chicken breast in the bag. It can be more complex than that if you choose to make it. But I think the key is, how do I get environmental control when I get where I'm going? And at risk of endorsing a company by accident, don't stay at hotels. Go to an Airbnb. Get a kitchen. In other words, our rule of eat unprocessed food and cook your own meals can be executed anywhere if you can cook. And so you can, and I've done this many times when I was traveling on seminar staff, we would land, go to the hotel, get an Uber or a taxi to the grocery store. Right? And even if I couldn't cook my own food, I could at least have minimally processed food available to me throughout the weekend. But if I can cook, so Annie and I recently went up to Montreal to do some mountain biking. We had an awesome time. We stayed in a tiny house, which has forever sworn me off of living in a tiny house. I'm like, are you still on my lap? What's happening here? Why is the dog on my feet? But we went to the grocery store. We had this tiny little kitchen with these cheap Target implements. It's not ideal, but we were able to cook our own meals. And so we had that environmental control. Right? And then I think the other important thing is, that may not be realistic for everybody in every situation. In other words, I travel for business, I'm flying somewhere, I have, to Brandy's point, happy hours, I have business meetings that they're catered, the food is in front of me. Okay. If that's the only food available to you, The shortcut is pretty simple. Eat it or don't eat it. This is it's binary. Okay. If it is simply sugar-laden crap, don't eat it. Don't eat it. You're better off literally not eating. And I know a lot of people are like, in that situation, what's the answer? The answer is don't eat it. Right? You can get through that hour, that next 2 hours, et cetera, until you can find some minimally processed food. But more likely, you're going to have constant access to restaurants. And so the question is, if I'm sitting at a table about to order from a waiter, what do I order? And the answer is really simple here. Recognizable foods. Okay? You want to order the chicken and the vegetables over the lasagna, right? You want to order the salmon on the salad. And in fact, meat on leaves is a great shortcut. Meat on leaves, man, is a great shortcut to macronutrient balance as well as minimally processed food. If you want to go nuts, order dressing on the sides, etc. But I think it brings us all the way back to our three things that a diet is, which is health-focused, sustainable, and imperfect. It's going to be imperfect in the restaurant. Just accept it. If you are asking them what kind of oil the thing was fried in, don't order the fried thing. It's going to be an imperfect meal, and so go with it. Now, if you're on the road all the time and this is your only access to food, it becomes obviously more important to turn up the lever on the Airbnb plus kitchen plus grocery shopping element of this. And I want to answer your actual question, Randy. If you want caloric consistency, true caloric consistency, get macronutrient consistency because it maps 1-to-1. A gram of fat always has the same number of calories in it, a gram of protein, a gram of carbs, etc. And track your macronutrient intake of unprocessed and minimally processed foods. How do you do that? You can get a macro prescription as easily as Googling macro calculator. And then get yourself MyFitnessPal. Now, I'm sure there are other apps at this point. That one's probably 10 to 15 years old at this point, MyFitnessPal. It works. You can track your macros. You can see exactly how much of each you're eating. And one of the neat tricks is not to see how much and to track what you're eating. It's to say, if I get towards the end of the day, towards the end of my eating window, and I don't have enough fat or protein or carbs in my system, what am I going to choose to eat? Okay, so I want things available to me that I will carry. Things like a bag of almonds or a bag of cashews. Things like some minimally processed beef jerky. Right? If I need that protein, you are probably on the road going to eat some unfavorable carbs, some processed food. You're probably going to eat some things you shouldn't. But if you ultimately want that consistency, it's about routine. Establish it at home. Establish a framework for routine on the road. And if you can't hit it because you're hitting it 90% of the time everywhere else, literally don't worry about it.
Amazing. I would only double click on one thing, which is what you just were sort of reminding us about, which is the health focused, sustainable, and imperfect. And one of the other things you talked about is sort of the stack ranking of what you need to understand. The first thing you got to have is knowledge. You've got to have knowledge, preparation, and environmental control. And I think one of the things that people really struggle with is and I see this because I work closely enough with E.C. Sinkowski, and she gets all of these questions. And a lot of the questions come down to, what can I eat? What should I eat? How much of it should I eat? And what I really like about what you said is, while short term that feels like the solution, just tell me what to eat. I'll just eat the thing. Just tell me. When you actually understand what you're trying to do and how to actually go about it, how to actually have create a nutrition plan or a diet that is health focused, that is sustainable, that is okay to be imperfect, you actually are giving yourself agency and giving yourself autonomy, because it's when my knowledge begins and ends with, well, John said I can only eat this. As soon as I don't have it, or as soon as I'm in the restaurant, or as soon as I don't sleep well enough and I haven't gone to the grocery, I fall apart and I don't know what to do. And I revert back to convenience, and I revert back to decisions that ultimately aren't getting us in the direction that we're trying to get to. And so understanding this, like actually investing the time, energy, and effort to get enough knowledge to be able to be autonomous with your diet is actually what people need to do. They don't need the rules and restrictions and constraints. They need to understand the few things that you laid out really nicely here so that when the universe hands you an imperfect day, I can still be 80% good here. I won't throw myself off track. I won't have weeks on end of being a mess and then starting over like, oh shit, okay, now I got to fast for 24 hours. And then tomorrow I'm doing the detox and then all the other stuff that happens.
Yeah, I thank you. And you're spot on. And a lot of times you're making the best bad decision you can. And so that's really the heuristic. And that's not a nutrition thing. That's hey, you're in a hotel room and you have to exercise. Make the best bad decision you can with that exercise. Do the exercise, even if it's 50 burpees and then you have to go. You don't have an hour for your workout program, work out for 15 minutes, right? Make the best bad decision you can. And I think there's one more thing to say about travel, if you don't mind, which is this. It's not just about what you eat. It's the hardest things to do on the road, in my mind, are sleep and work out. Okay. Food you can take care of. You can get a framework. Yes, it's challenging. Make sure you sleep. Get that 7.5 hours. And I used to travel with literally, I mean, it's funny. I mean, I still like at my house have the sleeping setup, right? But you need to be able to black out light. You need to be, and that's best done not with an eye shade. Carry an eye shade. You can get a great one for $5, right? Travel with earplugs. And when you get to the hotel, if it's a hotel, turn the AC up to 1,000,000. Make it as cold in there as you can. And so if you do those things, you make it cold, you can, control, then you get the sleep. You get the sleep. What happens when you wake up in the morning? You're not likely to seek processed food because you're not tired. And there is a correlation, and it's probably causation. Seeking glucose when you're tired is, in essence, serving the lack of brain function and cognitive capacity that comes from not sleeping. And so you've probably experienced this. You don't sleep, you eat a bunch of crap, right? You eat a bunch of crap, you don't have any energy because your energy levels have peaked and bottomed, and so you don't work out. Well, let's subvert that. Sleep and exercise, you'll be much more likely to find the food that you need to eat every day.
Amazing. That's a good tease to next week's episode, too. We're going to talk about one of our health behaviors, which is to exercise first. So stay tuned for that, folks. Thank you, John. Thank you to Brandy for your question. If you'd like to get a question into a future episode, optimalagency.co/questions. We look forward to reading them and hearing from you. We'll be back next week for a new episode of the Optimal Agency Podcast.